99% of animal products do not harm people, with the exception of like shellfish. But 99% of plants you can't eat because they will kill you upon consumption. Like, go out into the wild and have a bush of berries and see what happens. And it's like, then you start asking them, like, why do you, they're like, well, yeah, berries are poisonous. And it's like, why? Why are they poisonous? Yeah, why are they, did they produce the toxin? It's like, yeah, they did. Why do you think they did that? And you start to unravel, and it can happen very quickly. But what I think is, I've opened up my eyes. I've realized that they are, and again, not in a disparaging way, they are myopic. They're not realizing the whole. They're not zooming out. Right. And what I'm trying to do is get people to realize these facts that are, I mean, they're absolute facts, and they've been right out there in the open.
But you're absolutely right. People, they get stuck in these social norms, and this is just the way it's always been. But in reality, no, this is just the way it's always been for you. And yes, sadly, your life is but a tiny little sliver of a fraction of time throughout all of humanity. So people just gotta take a step back. I like thinking about it like, if we were aliens in a spaceship observing humans, the aliens would be so confused. Like, why are they poisoning themselves and developing these bellies and cancers and doing all of this stuff over and over again? It just doesn't make any sense. Hello and welcome. Carrie here from Healing Humanity, the Power of a Proper Human Diet. And today I'm privileged to have Eddie on the channel. Eddie, how's it going?
Good. How are you, man?
Good. Thank you for coming on. I've been watching you on YouTube. I saw you recently on Dr. Baker's podcast, and I picked up your book, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Man, some really good stuff there. So I was hoping to talk to you more about the book, but first I wanted to learn a little bit more about you. I'm doing this whole documentary, and the basis of the documentary is just documenting stories of people that have returned to a proper human diet and what it's done for their health across a wide variety of different health issues. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to finding a carnivore diet?
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting. My story is quite interesting. It's different from other people's within the space. Typically people come to the carnivore space because the carnivore diet saved their life. And mine's a little bit different. Of course, I'm not going to denigrate the diet. It definitely has made me feel better than I ever have before. But the way in which the events in my life transpired were quite different. So it started really whenever I was about 16 years old, my life took the turn. I was in my chemistry class, third hour, in high school. And at the time, I'm just living a normal life like every other kid, not really thinking of the future, just living in the moment. And I had a panic attack, but it built up. It was a very, very odd one. It wasn't that I had a panic attack that was elicited from mental manifestations or some thoughts that I was having. It was actually a physical sensation, butterflies in my stomach, first and foremost. And I just felt very off. And when I had the panic attack, I never realized that it actually was one until further reflection. I didn't know what was even happening. I just had to leave the room. And I thought it was just a fluke, but everything went downhill from there. I started getting POTS symptoms. So, I couldn't stand up without having elevations in blood pressure and pulse. And it actually got to the point where my pulse was elevated to about 130 at homeostatic levels. That was how it was every day. And that's while I was going to school, 16, 17 years old. It eventually got to the point where it was extremely debilitating. I'm not going to go through all the symptoms because then, I'll take up the whole hour of my story. If anyone is curious, that is listed in extensive detail in the epilogue of my book. I wanted to make sure that I got my entire story out there. But my major symptom was the most debilitating thing you can think of. It was, or at least that I can think of. It was basically I would have crippling pain that would bend me over, and I would keel over and not be able to walk whenever I experienced any emotion, whether it be happy, sad, like a positive or negative. No doctors have even heard of that before, from my experience. They don't even know what that is. And honestly, I don't even blame them because I'll get into what it actually was. And it's just, even then, it'll make sense. But you're like, I would have never guessed that at all. Eventually, I was told, though, that since everything occurring in me was internal, I was just gaslit into thinking that, it was all in my head. Not just by doctors. We hear this story. It's the overly trite story. It's all in your head. It's all in your head. And then it turns out to not be. but it was also from certain family members of mine. And that's what, you know, I forgive them now, of course, but it, if anyone understands what that's like, you start to actually believe it. Even though you don't believe it, you start to believe it. You start to be guilted into believing it almost. And so, especially given the fact that I was inculcated with an um, extreme value for work in terms of having a good work ethic and everything, I pushed myself. I ran myself into the dirt, actually. I got a job during the lockdowns of 2020 as everything just started to get worse and worse. My symptoms were um, becoming more and more debilitating. I actually got a job, ironically, during the lockdowns, April 30th of 2020, and it was at Walmart, which you may think is a sinecure, a very leisurely job. And in reality, I was working in the warehouse the whole time. So it was like the most heavy duty job in Walmart that I got the position for. And I ran myself into the dirt even more with that, not knowing what was going on with me, continuing to try and look up what was going on with me. I had no idea. Um, Eventually I did that for a year, went to work at Target. So it was just fluctuating from corporation to corporation because, you know, you go to Walmart, you get a higher chance of being hired at another corporation. So I went there, and it was far easier. But at that point, the damage had been done. So I was even worse and worse until January 9th of 2022. I was completely debilitated. I was going to the bathroom one day, just walking to the bathroom, and I looked down and I saw black for like 2 minutes, like completely, like, or not, sorry, not 2 minutes, 2 seconds. And it was blind. And that scared me. And then my stomach dropped. That induced pain because of emotion. So then it was a snowball effect. And I went on leave for work for 2 weeks, but I never ended up coming back. I thought it was a temporary leave. It wasn't. And throughout that time, I was completely debilitated. I wasn't just bedbound, I was floorbound. I couldn't actually lie in a bed because my symptoms would get worse. And this will make sense whenever I get to it. And I'm trying not to talk too much, but my story, it's inevitable. My story's going to be longer. Um, for months, I was basically staring up at the ceiling for from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, if I went to bed at all, um, wondering if anticipating my death effectively. Um, and I was 18 years old at that point, and I just kept thinking, I was like, you know, I'm 18 years old. Why is this happening to me? What happened? Like, what is going on? I've never been the woe is me type, but that was the furthest I've been pushed in that respect. But eventually, the more I looked into things, the more I started to find out information on the vagus nerves and how those actually regulate your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and therefore, you know, emotional responses. And at that point I was desperate. So even if the tiniest lead was a lead and I was going to take it, um, I eventually came across a condition by the name of CCI, craniocervical instability, which is characterized by a laxity of the ligaments, which are just what hold bone to bone of the cervical spine going up to the cranium, hence its name. And it sounded like basically the condition is that movement will cause impingement on surrounding nerves and arteries. And eventually, given the severity of the condition, the more impingement will occur. And eventually, if the impingement is chronic, it will be no longer just a simple impingement. It will be degeneration of the nerves, not the arteries per se, but that's already a problem in and of itself. The nerves will start to degenerate though. And so it can cause pain, but then it can cause dysfunction. And when you're talking about the nerves in the neck, like your phrenic nerves that go down to your diaphragm, your vagus nerves that are up here, that's a big issue. And I found a clinic that treated it. And it was April 6th of 2022, we actually traveled to Florida, which is where the clinic is. So we drove one day, 14 hours, to my grandma's house, who was an hour and a half away from the clinic. And I was going to stay with her. And they did some diagnostics on me, and they said, I'll never forget the main doctor there that owns the clinic and everything. He said that if you had come any later, you were on your way for something catastrophic, like word for word. He said that because he saw the instability was so extreme. My ligaments were really thin on the graphs there on the scans. And he could just tell also with digital motion x-rays. So it's a live motion x-ray whenever you do some extensions and flexions of your neck. He saw that it was very extreme. Luckily, there are treatments to actually completely ameliorate the condition, and that's what I've been undergoing. It's PRP. People may have heard of that before. Prolotherapy and PRP, where basically inject, in the case of prolotherapy, you inject some water, a syringe full of a mixture of water, sugar, dextrose, and you get this plant compound that promotes inflammation. Well, of course, it'd be a plant toxin, right? um, Plant compound. And then there's a little bit of a numbing agent in it, I believe. I know it's a four solution or four ingredient solution, but that will stimulate inflammation in the area. They inject that into the ligaments, yeah, and they will actually effectuate inflammation in the area, and that will initiate the healing process. It's not a one-time fix. You have to get multiple, and depending on the severity of it, you have to get more than other people. They said that I would need about 13 at least in my neck, and that's insane. They are very intense therapies. This place is a comprehensive PRP clinic. PRP just being where they draw your blood and they concentrate the healing elements out of it and do the same thing. So it's more effective in a lot of cases. And it's this clinic does it comprehensively, so they can administer up to like 100 at once. Other clinics do about one or two, and that's one of the reasons why the therapy kind of has a bad rap, because you can't really expect it to be too effective if you're only injecting one or two into the area. But the last thing I'll say is the further we actually got to, the further I underwent some diagnostics, I was effectively diagnosed with hypermobile EDS, and I say effectively because there was one criterion that I did not meet, which is that it doesn't affect my vascular system, but everything else. So effectively, I am still structurally impaired. Basically, what that is it's the same condition I just elucidated, but it's through my whole body. So it's not just my neck; it is every single ligament of my body that is damaged, and that's actually why I was experiencing such pain with emotion. My ribs, all of my ribs, which is, you feel your emotions in your torso. Anytime that I would feel an emotion that stimulates muscle contractions, and it would pull my ribs and they were already loose, so it would pull them. Every single time I would experience any emotion. And I actually still have that to a degree, which is why I can't hold a normal conventional job, let's say. But the final thing I'll say is the way that led me to carnivore. Like, how is this relevant? Well, during that same time, when I wasn't just trying to figure out what was wrong with me structurally, what that led me to originally was diet, because I thought that it had something to do with what was going on. And I became very bodily conscious, and so I became very aware of how certain foods made me feel with the condition I had. And one time I had a bunch of grain-based sweet snacks at night, because that's what I would do. It's like, I'm bored, I'm just going to go eat something, because I never packed on weight anyway. I never had to worry about that. So it's like, if I want to taste something sweet, I'll go ahead and do that. And it was a bunch of grain-based stuff. And I realized that all of my muscle twitching that typically occurs with the condition, because the muscles are trying to stabilize the area, it all acted up. Like, it was like I was vibrating. And I was like, what's going on? And I looked up things like, are grains killing you or something? Or are grains bad for you? And a CrossFit Impulse, an article by CrossFit Impulse comes up that says, why grains are killing you. And that was when I learned about phytates and lectins and stuff. Came across Dr. Gundry and did his diet for a while. Became pretty emaciated. Then went on the Dave Asprey train. So I added more animal protein, but I was still doing like basically Gundry and Asprey mixed diet. And then I came across, Paul Saladino, which everyone seems to do at least once, and did the meat and fruit diet. Did not feel good. It was the first time after I ate that I would actually have what is colloquially deemed the meat sweats. Acne started to come up, red flushed face afterwards, and all that stuff. And then I came across Professor Bart Kay on August 14th of 2022 and realized the indication of the absence of carbohydrates, and embarked upon that journey August 23rd. And then here I am. I started the channel up because I was learning so much. Just decided to take matters into my own hands and actively learn multiple subjects that are college level that you can just get for free. and then actively write research papers on every lesson because I had the time. I never decided to pick up a controller and play video games during the time. I was like, I'm going to do something productive throughout these years. And that's exactly what I did. And so I've got a extreme superfluous stash of information and articles and papers in my Google Drive folders. And it was of every lesson that I ever learned during these courses. And I'm not done yet, but I was pushed by my family to start a channel because they said that I'm really I articulate the topics well. So whenever I was teaching them the stuff, if they asked, they're like, "You probably do some of those videos." And I was like, "No." I pushed back, and then eventually I was like, "You know what? I'm not doing anything really. I mean, I'm learning, and that is something, but I want to get the information out there, especially when you realize how much we've been lied to." So sorry for that tangential little rant there, but that's what brought me to the movement, and that's what brought me to what I've been doing this last year. So
Right. No, that's fascinating. That's just crazy. Like, it almost sounds like something out of a comic book where you get emotional and causes you pain. It's just,
yeah,
I never heard of anything like that where you almost have to regulate your activities if you can't figure out, the root cause of this thing. Did you ever do that? Like, geez, I can't watch this movie, or I
that's
can't do this
exactly
because
what happened. I couldn't watch TV. I could not do it. So I was lying on the ground, and when I said that I was looking up at the ceiling from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, I wasn't even on my phone. I was just looking because if I did anything, it was going to cause me pain. Even thoughts themselves, if they would elicit emotions from me, that was enough to cause at least slight pain. So I had to control my thoughts. I had to control my emotions really, I mean, really intently, I guess you could say. It like I had to be very focused, and so I was always on edge. Um, it wasn't fun, and I still have that problem to a degree, depending on what position I'm in. Actually, so if I'm sitting down, sometimes it's worse. If I'm standing up, it's better. If I'm lying down, it's the best. But it's all because of rib positioning. So, you know that's what it goes back to. Yeah.
Mm. One of the things I've been learning talking to so many people with different chronic health issues, many that are kind of unexplainable, or it was like you said earlier, you can't really blame the doctors because this is such an unusual thing that you had, but you would probably still be suffering right now if you weren't your own advocate and done your own research and figured this out yourself. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, I mean, I went to a neurologist during that time as well to find out what was going on with me. And they did some tests on me, and their diagnosis was that I've got some slight neuropathy in my elbow, and I need to gain some weight in order to prevent it, to add some insulation. I mean, these are the types of diagnoses you're going to get. And it was
Right.
just, especially in my area where I am in Illinois, it's a medical dead zone where I'm at, and so it doesn't make it any better. But it is still conventional knowledge that they were promulgating to me and to other patients that they're administering to them, really. And yeah, it's a problem. And so one of the goals of my channel is to put information into people's hands, like empower them with the information, because knowledge is power at the end of the day. So yeah.
Right. So how long roughly have you been carnivore now?
So it was since August of 2022 I've been on that train. I only had, so in terms of the makeup of my diet, that has changed a little bit. It's been carnivore. It's just originally I started with red meat, eggs, and butter with salt. No seasonings really to speak of. Maybe some like garlic powder. Again, transitioning into strict carnivore, you can use those as tools. I mean, I think that there's really no problem with that. I used garlic powder and onion powder on my steak sometimes, but eventually I weaned off of that, and I was doing not strict lion, but it was red meat and butter that I was doing for a while, probably for about 8 months, 9 months, and had no problems. I enjoyed it quite well. At that point I was having grass-fed beef, ground beef, and grass-fed steak, where I was staying in Florida. And then whenever I came back home, because I would have to stay there for months at a time. Whenever I came back home, in 2023, I did start to reintroduce some of the, during that time, it was some processed meats like pepperoni and salami. Just to, I think it was palate fatigue, and also it was there in my dad's house because my dad, everything that I've learned, he learns it at the same time. So we basically adapt at the same time. So he, at that point, had also started carnivore. And he had that in the house, though. So I was like, oh, well, I'm going to eat it. So there's that, and then some dairy as well. Right now, it's once again, it's ground beef, eggs, salt, butter, and maybe I do have some shredded cheese on my eggs. And that's what I've been eating. But I have been carnivore since August of 2022. Yeah.
Nice. And so you kind of came into this because you noticed what was happening when you were eating grains and other foods.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of things, if any, have you noticed during your progression of carnivore? Have you noticed any other changes physically or mentally from the diet?
Yeah, so it's difficult to answer that question sometimes, depending on the context, because I was going through 3 different treatments effectively at once. So I was getting PRP and prolotherapy. I was changing my diet, and I was doing some other things at the same time. I started taking Cerule products at the same time, and it's hard to tell which one did what. But what I can say is what I think can be attributed to the diet. One of which is one that I think is often not talked about enough, uh, and it's actually quite liberating. The fact that you don't really get hungry. That you don't really get hungry. I've gone 48 hours without food before, and I started to eat, but not even because I was hungry. It was more like I'm a little cold. I'm gonna go eat some food.
Right.
It's you don't really get hungry, which is it is liberating, and also it'll save you money. That's the other serendipitous effect of that. But also I don't have any acne anymore, except for there's this little thing that popped up about yesterday, which it was so astonished. I was like, "Oh, the irony! I'm about to have an interview and talk about my experience on carnivore," and then got a little pimple right there. But no, I mean I don't really get any acne anymore. My skin is clearer but also smoother. My propensity to develop sunburns has been almost non-existent unless I stay out for hours, right? Um, my mental clarity is better, and also my symptoms with my condition are much, much better. The joint inflammation, it's far easier for me to alleviate my symptoms if I am feeling pain by shifting positions than it was before. Before it was just no matter what it was going to feel less painful, but not better, if that makes sense. Like less painful, not good, less painful. And now
Right.
it's like, okay, I can actually alleviate the pain. I was, far, far better and far more effectively. And I think I would actually have more of a list there if I had more time to think about it. But also, if I had been older, let's say, and had enough time to accrue issues that are related to plants, because I started at 19 years old. I was
Right.
already young. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. You're kind of a young man still. Like the brain. Well, you kind of mentioned the cognitive ability improving.
Mhm.
Brain fog was a huge one for me, but I think that was something probably when I was your age. I didn't have that much, but over the years it just grew and grew. Depression, anxiety, things like that. But uh, interesting. You mentioned the sunburn. I've talked about this on my channel before, and boy, does this get people fired up. I said before, like carnivores don't get sunburn, and probably like hundreds of people were like, it's true, I don't get sunburn as a carnivore. And then an equal amount on the other side were like, wait a minute, I'm carnivore and I do get sunburn. And then I'm like, are you really carnivore? Are you having a little something here? Do you have any theories on why? There's something going on there with carnivores and sunburn. Do you have any ideas what that could be?
Right. Yeah. So I've thought about it before. The most commonly touted reason is because of the absence of seed oils. They believe that the seed oils are somehow affecting the skin in a negative way. It's clearly, I mean, a burn invariably always is a manifestation of inflammation. Like anything that's red, swollen, burning, that is inflammation. And if you raise your propensity for developing inflammation with things like seed oils, it's not necessarily the fact that they necessarily perhaps deposit into the skin or something like that, but you are inflaming your tissues, which may raise your propensity for developing sunburns in the sun.
Right.
I think that it is just overall inflammation, whether it be from plants, whether it be from seed oils. Of course, seed oils are arguably the most inflammatory out of all of the other things. Of course, it depends on who you are, but when you really look at how those are produced and the byproducts that are in there and all that stuff, it's like, wow, that's just poison. That is a bane.
Right.
So yeah, but in my opinion, it really is probably a combination of all those things. But yes, I am one of those people that also believes that it is a seed oil issue. I do believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny. I had so many comments too where people are like, "You're just so stupid. Yeah, you're not the sun isn't going to burn you anymore because you're suddenly carnivore." And I'm like, look at all of the individuals that go on a carnivore diet for skin related issues and then they recover. I just interviewed a gentleman. He had psoriasis for 30 years, lesions, bloody lesions on his body, just agonizing pain. And he went carnivore. He's been on it for 1 year. His skin is perfect right now. He's absolutely dumbfounded and amazed. So I always say to those people that are saying I'm stupid for saying that, uh, why do these people then that go on carnivore, their skin issues clear up? There's clearly something going on there. I think you're right with the seed oils, the inflammation. I think so many people that hear I'm doing carnivore, they're like, you're gonna die, you're gonna have a heart attack, that meat's gonna clog your arteries, and none of those people are worried at all about inflammation or poor metabolic health. And they probably all should be worried about that, but they're worried about what I'm doing, which is kind of crazy. But
Yep.
can we talk a little bit about your book, man? I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love the book. I don't know. I can't even imagine like the amount of time you put into this. Can you tell us a little bit about it for those that aren't familiar?
Right. So, it's actually a pretty funny story. While I was in Florida and I was typing out all these papers, um, I was spending the time I woke up to the time I went to bed at that point, just studying. I was watching videos originally, sort of the superficial information first, and then it piqued my curiosity because that's who I am. Even in school, I was known for being the book smart person until high school, and then I started messing around a little more. But I was still that my mentality was still the same though, the way I thought, and so I just started, especially considering the fact that I took it more seriously than people my age, because of what I had gone through. I'd suffered early, so I was looking into it, and then in order to ensure that I knew the information, so I've heard it and I agree with it now, but can I actually tell it to someone and make sense? I started typing papers, and it was like, if you look at them, they look like research papers. Like I would submit it to a professor. I would put the superscript citations on there and everything, and I was like, but it was in order to ensure that I understood it, and then I'd reread it and revise and revise and revise. And I did that for so many things, whether it be cholesterol and heart disease, vitamin C, fiber. And it got to a point where I was thinking, well, there's so much information here. Why don't I just put it into one thing, like one book? Because at the time I was sending it to like my family and my friends and be like, hey, check this out, read this. Like this is important. Most of them wouldn't read them, but it's whatever. It's there. Like you can't say I didn't send it to you, right? And so that is actually half the book is papers I wrote. And so in order to tie it all together, that was the other half. And so what I did is during the summer, it was in July, I believe. It was like late June, July of 2023. I decided to get up every morning at like 8 in the morning. At that point, I'd fixed my sleep schedule with the whole, turning off artificial light after the sunset, it's relieving. Now I don't even, my circadian rhythm is naturally, I wake up at 7, but that's what I was doing in Florida. That's what I was doing. And I was like, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go into the office, my grandma's house where I was staying. And, I took her little mini laptop, her Dell. It was like really old, but I was like, if it can access Google Docs, it's fine.
Yeah.
And I spent 12, 13 hours a day for 2 weeks writing the other half. It took 2 weeks to write the other half.
Wow.
In terms of editing, that took way longer, of course. I'm just typing, right? And then I decided to read it back and read it back and read it back and edit and edit and edit. And it's still not perfect, because we decided to go through a ghostwriting club, sort of an independent publisher, and they were not they didn't really treat my book very well. And I set a release date for it, so it released, and I'm still actually, luckily, since it's on Amazon, I can just edit it whenever, and then it'll change it when it's printed.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, that's just a side note. But yeah, that was the story of it. That's what I did. That's how I
Wow.
wrote. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? There's several sections. It's so interesting. There's so much good stuff in here. One of the things you talk about early in the book was human nutrition science fails to be a hard science.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? Quick interruption. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about our documentary, Healing Humanity, The Power of a Proper Human Diet, or supporting it, please visit donate.healinghumanity.movie. Our goal is to reach millions of people that are hopeless right now and sharing the examples of real people over the course of 1 year that are undertaking a proper human diet to overcome obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety, fertility issues. We couldn't do it without you. We thank you so much. We are also selling these shirts, Healing Humanity, The Power of a Proper Human Diet. Every penny we get from those goes towards the documentary. And last, we have memberships. If you click the little join button, it's best to do it on desktop. Under any one of my YouTube videos, you can join and become a member. We have hundreds of members right now. We do members only videos. We do members only behind the scenes. You can email me as a member and I'll answer you. And every penny from that goes to support the documentary. And the last thing is we have these Redmond's portable salt shakers. These things are awesome. You can get the best salt. You can take it with you. We sell these on the website along with our water bottles and cutting boards, and every penny from all of those goes 100% towards supporting the documentary. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which is completely free. All of these links are in the description below. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to today's video.
Right. So human nutrition science in the way that we know it to be today, really has been a thing since the 1950s with Ansel Keys' study with the lipid heart hypothesis and the 7-nation study, which is really a 23-nation study or something. Well, that in and of itself is based on what we call it's inferential statistics, and the entire area of that science. You ask any competent statistician, which I talk to them. One of them in particular found me and has been doing this for 15 years and has said the exact same thing. It never, ever says anything about causality. You can't do that. You can't say anything about causality in that science because you can't control for human beings. You can control as much as you would like to. You can get to a degree of the most control that you can impose and exert. You cannot get to complete control, and therefore you leave room for many confounders, and so you cannot say cause. And that's one of the most trite points on my channel. We live in an era where all it is paper flashed up on the screen. Paper, 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 paper. And also to the point where you ensure that your viewers don't have enough time to read it. So then they must believe you because you put a paper on the screen and there's words that you don't understand and it's too sophisticated. And what I try and get people to understand is, first of all, if it's like an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, most of the time it is not properly randomized. There's multiple different ways to randomize things, and they usually fail to do it properly. And also, it's not controlled. Yeah, it's not controlled. They say that they're controlled to sound scientific, but metabolic ward studies, if there is complete control, and even then, you can't really do that. But they don't last long enough. You can't get it past an ethics committee because it's unethical to control for human beings and force feed them things at certain times and this and that. Rightfully so. You can't do that. Like you can't do that. You've got the fact that it'd be exorbitantly expensive and also just implausible. You have to control for the time they wake up, the stress levels, their hormone levels. You have to control for all these things. And so what I've tried to get people to understand is that it's this. These aren't my words, actually. Bart Kay says it the best when he uses this analogy. He says it's a ring-fenced area of science. And that's exactly what it is, because really science requires experimentation. It is something that it's a reach to even call it science. Therefore, you can infer opinions and derive opinions from it. That's fine. And people can do that all they want. I even do that sometimes, depending on what the study's results are. But in order to find what is the most appropriate method of establishing what is, indicated for humans to eat as a species, you look at things like paleoanthropology. It can be inferential paleoanthropology is one, just to start with, and that's still inferential. But you're looking at heart remains, like you're looking at the remains of human beings. But you've also got things like chemical anthropology, where you take the bones and you combust them in a mass spectrometer, you isolate the collagen and the protein, and you can actually measure the gas exudation and see exactly what we were eating, exactly what those remains of those people were eating. And things like biochemistry that I focus a lot on, because that is our body. That is our physiology. Our physiology is an entire equilibrium or equilibria of chemical reactions, but hundreds, thousands of them. And also physics when talking about calories, things like comparative anatomy. I look at all of those things and it points in a different direction than what human nutrition science will, or at least can, because many take vegetarians, for example, they put plant-based supporting studies on the screen. Well, for every single one of those that they post or put on the screen, I can put one that says the exact opposite, that was done the same way, that was done. So even when it comes to studies that come to a conclusion that aligns with the carnivore space, I go, well, great. However, that would not be my first method of action when assessing what we're designed to eat, because it is not science. It can give you an idea, but it will never be a hard science. And people believe that they are scientific because, well, scientists conduct them or something. And especially these prospective cohort studies that are just observations on very aged populations as well, over like millions of people, and they never ever they just depend on respondent data, for example.
Right.
Healthy user bias, unhealthy user bias. People lie, people forget. Also, the reporting of relative outcome statistics as opposed to absolute outcome statistics. Which, for anyone that doesn't understand, relative outcome statistics are things like percentages and ratios and proportions. And to give an example of why that's an issue, if they don't report the absolute values, is because, well, this past winter in Illinois, one day it was 4 degrees outside Fahrenheit, and the next day it was 9 degrees. Well, that would be over 100% increase in temperature. Well, the difference is 5 points.
Right.
That's a problem. And so it's like, this increases your risk of death by 67%. Well, first of all, to isolate it to one food, like what else were these people eating? But even let's say that it had that effect. The differences between controlled and experimental populations in epidemiological studies, which is what I'm referring to, when changing the outcome statistics into absolute outcomes, is somewhere between the ranges of in the tenths or hundreds of thousands of chances of death per person per year of follow-up, which if you're going to convert that into or multiply that over a 100-year lifespan for 100 years for a 100-year lifespan, for example, the utility of that is much, much less than absolutely nothing at all. And so you can say things like, oh, 80% increase in this or decrease in this. And it's like, that's not scientific. I'm sorry. You
Right.
just look at the raw data and you'll see it right there. There's many other issues with it, and I could talk about it for days, but those are the biggest ones that I can think of right now. And also the adjusting of the results at the end, which is just fabrication.
Right. That's been one of my biggest eye openers after doing carnivore, because all my life I'd see these studies and papers and I just dumbly and blindly was like, whoa, those are science. That's science, right? That's there to help me. And it's all skewed, it's all biased. And like you said in the book too, just to properly measure it, what are you going to lock two people in a room, feed them the exact same things, wake them up at the same, it wouldn't, it's never going to happen. It's not happening. And therefore, why are we putting so much weight on all of these studies? And you just hear them touted left and right. And it's just insane.
Right.
So the next question I have for you, I think I kind of know the answer, but you get into this deeply in the book, is, does humanity need healing? That's the name of our documentary. Like, when you look around in the world right now, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, that's not even a question at this point. The thing about it is I was getting very, I was alone with my thoughts for a long time. And it was one of the things that was really, really frustrating me, because I was still talking to people, like some of my friends, and I heard their regular lamentations of things like, oh, I'm so tired, and I'm like, oh, my stomach hurts all the time, all the time.
Yeah.
Like extreme pain. And then, the the malnourishment that I was seeing that they couldn't see because it's just normal. Like people just like looking like skeletons, the lack of muscle mass in these people. And I was just getting so like at first, because when you feel an emotion viscerally, in many cases it's very volatile and you take it out on the wrong thing or the wrong person. And at first, like my first thing was like getting mad at them. I was like, why do you not understand? I'm telling you the answer. I'm telling you what to do. I'm telling you exactly what the problem is. But I had to remember, they're not going to be taking things as seriously as I am because I am in such a rut right now. But also, I had to remember, like, I'm just one person in their lives telling them something, and it's completely unorthodox. So why would they listen to me at all? If it's normal, then they're just going to feel normal and they're going to accept it as, there's nothing wrong with them because everyone else feels the same way. But it was getting me very angry at the medical establishment, of course. And just the state of the world. And then I traced it back to where it came from. And, I did that in the book as well. That's exactly what it was. It was just this complete timeline of going through like, okay, well, this was when Big Pharma was established. This is when seed oils were implemented. And this was based on this. This is why it happened. And it was just, I couldn't stand by and have all this information in my head and not get it out there to try and change that. The most infuriating thing is seeing that still to this day, in particular, is seeing what is fed to hospital patients. That always gets me. And seeing what's ostentatiously, like just on full display in their waiting rooms as well. I've had a few people on my channel that I've reacted to that have said that they call them grocery store walkers because I mean that's what they did. They go in and they expose all of the food in the grocery stores, but also in hospitals sometimes, and they tout that as being fear mongering. And I'm going, well, what do you mean fear mongering? This needs to be exposed because this is poison. Why do you think these people are in the hospital in the first place?
Right.
What do you think they're in like the common argument? I've heard, many people say it on my channel, in my reaction videos is well, many cancer patients, they actually can't, especially going through chemotherapy, they can't stomach anything except like milkshakes in some circumstances. And I go, if that's the case, and I'm sure because it's a very common occurrence, then of course Twinkies are better than starvation. I'm not going to pretend like it's not, but I'm not going to sit here and say you should eat Twinkies then. I'm not going to do that. And you should feed them Twinkies. And also they should be on full display before anything else. Like this right in front. And that's a problem. Yeah. And I just saw a post today. Someone's husband was in the hospital for something and he had hyperglycemia at 380 blood sugar level the day prior. And they gave him one hard-boiled egg the next morning for breakfast, and the rest of it was Frosted Flakes with milk, juice, maybe some Cheerios on the side. I think it may have actually been 2 sets of cereal, which is interesting. And his wife only let him have the hard-boiled egg, and then she had to talk with the dietitian that fed him. And it was just it infuriated me. I was like, that will always get me is the hospital foods. Like these people are dying, and so let's just give them sugar.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So one of the individuals we're filming for this documentary name is Jeff DeProsperous. He has stage 4 cancer. And that was one of the most infuriating things. He told me he goes in for chemo treatment and they come around with cookies and Ensure. And
Ensure. Yes. Yeah.
And he said to me, he's like, he's absolutely thriving on carnivore. He started on the standard American diet. He was getting chemo and he was suffering and he was sick and he had nausea. On carnivore, it's totally bearable. He says, I feel like I'm 20 years old. He's got endless energy. All his inflammation's gone. His depression went away and everything. But he said, when I interviewed him for our documentary, he said, I believe I probably caused my cancer from eating highly inflammatory food for years and years and decades and decades. And we've since interviewed Professor Thomas Seyfried from Boston College about it too. And it's kind of what he comes up with. Yeah, you can get cancer from smoking cigarettes or toxins, but a lot of it's chronic inflammation. And I know for sure I was definitely chronically inflamed from the foods I was eating for so many years. So.
Yeah, that's actually why smoking and all those other things will cause will cause cancer in the first place. It seems is the inflammation they induce.
Yeah.
Like Thomas Seyfried actually does a really good job of breaking that down because I've looked into it as well, and it's what he said. It all comes right back down to mitochondrial dysfunction in
Yeah.
all of cancer. Invariably, all of cancer cells have dysfunctional mitochondria that are actively turned off by the cell to allow the cell to continue surviving, the cancer cell, because otherwise the mitochondria would kill the cell through apoptosis. And
Right.
so the cell actually has the inability, just a fun fact, not to get too granular, but the cancer cells actually have a complete inability to use fat for fuel because fat oxidation is an exclusively mitochondrial process.
Hmm.
Glycolysis is not. And so cancer cells draw glucose from the blood exorbitantly more, like up to
Yeah.
40,000% more in some cases. And so
Yeah.
they depend on glucose. And depending on your manifestation of cancer, whether it be liver or kidney cancer, it can use glutamine. And that pretty much requires at least some degree of pharmacological intervention. It still does not require chemotherapy, though. That's a dangerous thing. And I'm not I got to be careful because I know that some people may be going through chemotherapy. I'm not denigrating them or disparaging them. I'm just saying there are better options, and at least I want to make people aware of that. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so here's a question for you. There's so many people are going to say, so what is this? Some big conspiracy theory? Eddie, everything I've been told my whole life. Vegetables are good for you. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Meat's going to clog your arteries. Is this just some big conspiracy theory that you figured out and we're just the rest of the world's just confused? Like, what do you say to that argument?
No, I absolutely think so. I One of the things that I talk about in my book is just the whole book is tearing things down, and it's not that I went in trying to tear things down. It was more so we started with a clean slate, and then we were building up from there. And then when we found out the origins behind some things, we took that tower down in a way and formed a better picture of like what we're actually supposed to be doing. In terms of, I mean, I can talk about each thing independently, but I know we're limited on time in that degree because I can, but yeah, in terms of, I'll start off with the one thing, plants being good for you. When you look at our anthropological past, of course, the stable nitrogen and carbon uh, isotope analyses conducted on the long bones of ancient human remains showed unambiguously cause and effect. This is causal that we ate. We derived 80% of our effective fuel intake from large ruminant animals, and the other 20% was from large fibrous tubers. But inferentially speaking, when you look at other sciences, that was during times of starvation and unsuccessful hunting. So even then, 80%. I mean, that's a large amount. And in terms of carbohydrate content, you were getting that during fruit season, and even then, that's a very ephemeral season. But also, the fruit back then was very small. In fact, in terms of vegetables is a culinary term. Really, we hybridized plants to be bigger, and then we made vegetables because back then, yeah, there were some vegetables, but a lot of times, if you look at records, written records, they didn't refer to things as vegetables, or they referred to them as herbs. And so you had herbs, and then you grow plants to be even bigger, and then you've got what we have today. But 13,000 years ago is when we really started to eat plants in any significant amount because of the extinction of the megafauna, which was a multifaceted issue. Overhunting, it seems, is one, and also vast climate change because the ice age was completely, the ice was wiped basically, um, and so for 13,000 years we were consuming plants, and it just started to increase in its amount. You got to think, at first we were using it as a subsistence method. We knew how to cultivate things for our benefit when it was necessary. And then generations to come, well, what happens? It's a generational thing, and it becomes a familial thing, and it becomes a cultural thing. So we started eating plants and started eating plants. And then we started to learn how to make them less perishable. And we started to learn how to make them actually taste good. So, and make meat taste good with it. And so increasingly, there's more and more plants, more and more plants. Even then, though, we were still eating primarily meat. And then it got to a point where we just believed that a balanced diet was the best. And you can look in the 1950s, it was the can't remember exactly what, I think it was the 5 food groups graph in the 1950s that showed that these are your food groups that you need to eat. And so now you have government institutions telling you that you should be eating it, and that just expedited this whole thing, in my opinion, from what I can see. And then not only now are plants benign, and we should just totally be eating them, they can't do us any harm. They only have nutrients and minerals. They don't have any toxins at all that are going to harm us. They're actually now in the world of in the world we live in today, better for you than animal products. And so now we just got this whole thing backwards. I mean, again, in the 1950s, it wasn't really started because of Ansel Keys and Eisenhower having a heart attack, and stuff like that. And so, right. Yes, in terms of is everything built upon lies and is everything just a conspiracy theory? I mean, if you let one conspiracy theory or one lie promulgate untrammeled and unscathed, and you keep doing that for every new lie that comes out, well, then, yeah, everything's going to be built upon lies. And then once you finally realize that each one of those lies is underpinned by the same thing, once you tear that one thing down, all of these lies just come crumbling down. So, yes, I do believe that most of everything that has transpired in the health sphere for the last couple decades and over a century, really, has been a lie. And so if you want to call it a conspiracy theory, I mean, you can, but in many cases, it's not conspiracy, it's documented evidence that occurred.
Right.
So,
yeah, the whole vegetable thing is just crazy. It was starvation food. It was and now when you look at it too, because I get this argument all the time from family and friends, just eat a balanced diet, just have some vegetables and have this. It drives me absolutely insane too, because you look at vegetables now, they don't have the nutrients that they used to like 100 years ago because the soil's deficient. They've got pesticides in them, glyphosate in them. I used to be so obsessed with eating a salad, for example, and now when you really think about it, like the amount of energy my body extracts from that lettuce is probably less than required to chew it or have my stomach process that lettuce. It's like a lose-lose, but you got people just screaming, it's so good for you. You gotta have your vegetables.
Right. Well, I think the whole idea of having a balanced diet, there's 2 reasons why it's so enticing to people. And first of all, you take a word that is typically associated with goodness and wholesomeness, and you just apply it to everything. And apparently, therefore it is appropriate. Let me ask those people, and something that I always ask them, which is, what animal in the wild has a balanced diet? What animal has a balanced diet? Right. I mean, many of these herbivores eat like 3 plants. I mean, they can eat others, but in many cases, they'll die if they eat another. Like they've evolved to eat 1 or 2 specific plants. I mean, where's the balance in a cow's diet? There's no balance. It's one food. Right. But I think the other reason why it's so enticing is because of the fact that, it's one of those things where, yes, you've got animals that are more adept at consuming one food, and then you've got humans that don't immediately die, from eating plants and all these other things. And since they have vitamins and minerals and all this stuff, and we've hybridized them to be more innocuous and benign, it's really easy to say, well, we've been doing it for a long, long time, and therefore it must be correct. But also, when you really look at the landscape here, there's so much inundation of information. So 1 second eggs are good, 1 second eggs are bad, 1 second carbs are good, 1 second carbs are bad. Eventually people get sick and tired of it, and they just throw their hands up in the air and go, well, we need balance. Like that. I'm sick and tired of all this nonsense. What's so hard about sticking to a balanced diet? And so I think that's another reason why people do it. They say it so much, because every corner they turn, it's like, well, seed oils actually are not harmful. Seed oils are good for you. Seed oils are bad for you. Eggs are bad. And so they're just tired of it, and they go, well, I'm just going to have everything, but moderate it all. And so that's, in that case, that's understandable. That makes sense. So I just wanted to comment on that, because I was just thinking about that yesterday as well. I think I said something about that in my video.
Right.
Recorded. Yeah.
There's millions of species on this planet, but humans, we've got the biggest brains, apex predators, and we're screwing this up so bad. Like now that you kind of see this clearly and you've written the book and you understand it, do you think lesser of humans? Like what is going on here, and how are we screwing this up so bad? Like you were saying earlier, you look at other species of animals, and then you look at humans, and we're literally deforming our bodies with these big bellies, and we've got diabetes and unprecedented cancer rates. It's kind of discouraging in some ways. Like I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
Yeah, well, I think that most people are, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way. I just mean it by virtue of being, for existing for only a very ephemeral amount of time in the grand scheme of things, myopic. I think, you know, when you're born and you're growing up, you're taught certain things about what you should eat and how you should live and all this stuff, and then you take it as just sacrosanct. Basically, you take it as just that's how it is, and so then these ideas become, when you're exposed to them, even if you were to look at it on a grand scale, which is what I did in the book. To them, they're not looking at the grand scale. They're looking at their life, their 20 years that they lived and what they've been taught and seen and have experienced in that time frame. And they're saying, well, that's the truth. That's what's real. That's the reality of things. Not looking at the entire history of human existence and seeing if that makes sense and holds up when doing that, which it doesn't. I mean, take 13,000 and divide that by 4.5 million and see what percentage point you get in terms of how much of our existence has been spent eating plants to any significant degree. For example, it's like, okay, do you think that we should be eating plants then? Do you think that maybe we haven't completely evolved to tolerate carbohydrates and plant toxins, especially? And then you start to pose more questions to them, like, okay, so 99% of animal products do not harm people, with the exception of like shellfish because of a protein on them. But we're not evolved to eat shellfish exclusively. We weren't doing that, so I mean that still holds up a little bit. But 99% of plants you can't eat because they will kill you upon consumption. Like go out into the wild and have a bush of berries and see what happens. And it's like, then you start asking them, like, why do you? They're like, well, yeah, berries are poisonous. And it's like, why? Why are they poisonous? Like, have you thought about why they are? It's like, yeah, why are they? Yeah, did they produce the toxin? It's like, yeah, they did. Why do you think they did that? And you start to unravel, and it can happen very quickly. But yeah, my perspective, the reason I'm saying all this is because you said, what is my perspective on humanity? I don't think lesser of them, but what I think is I've opened up my eyes. I've realized that they are, and again, not in a disparaging way, they are myopic. They're not realizing they're not zooming out.
right.
And what I'm trying to do is get people to realize these facts that are, I mean, they're absolute facts, and they've been right out there in the open, but it's just one of those things where they just never put two and two together. And so that's what I think needs to be done, because I don't think we need to. It would be amazing if everyone bought my book and read the whole thing, right? But I don't even think people really need to do that. Sometimes they just need to read like a chapter or something, and then they start the thoughts unravel for themselves, right? So
Right.
I hope that made sense. But
It
yeah,
does. No, I love how you put that too. You just kind of have a conversation with them. But you're absolutely right. People, they get stuck in these social norms, and this is just the way it's always been. But in reality, no, this is just the way it's always been for you. And
yes,
sadly, your life is but a tiny little sliver of a fraction of time throughout all of humanity. So people just you gotta take a step back. I like thinking about it like, if we were aliens in a spaceship observing humans, the aliens would be so confused. Like, why are they poisoning themselves and developing these bellies and cancers and doing all of this stuff over and over again? It just doesn't make any sense. What are your thoughts, Eddie? Like, how bad is humanity if we just continue doing what we're doing? Like, what are your thoughts for the future if we don't make a change?
yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, of course, if we continue doing what we are doing, we're going to see a massive population decline. We're already starting to see the tip of that iceberg. Before we're already seeing the climax, and it's just going to, but in terms of, let's say, like evolution, like how our decline is going to go, that's going to take a long time. I don't know if we'll actually see the ramifications of that in our lifetime, more than what we've already seen. But I don't think we're. I think that we are. I've thought about this a lot. I think we are on our way for a decline in our population, and not just the United States. I'm talking about around the world, because now you've got India having, I think, perhaps the, if it's not the largest, it's one of the largest um, amounts of diabetes present within a population.
Mm.
And now you've also got countries in Europe that are exhibiting. We were known as the fattest nation in the world for a long time, and now it's not the case. It's about to be not the case. It's about to be equal with other European countries. It's all of the Western world that's being affected, and so you're already seeing ramifications exponentially increase. And so, who's to say what that association is going to look like, and that rate is going to look like in just another decade or so?
Yeah.
It does scare me. It does scare me. But what I also see is a silver lining, which is the vast exponential increase in the um, permeation of the carnivore and ketogenic ideology. And I say ideology. I don't want people to think that's synonymous with theology or something. I mean, it's predicated upon science, but it's a system of ideas that we've derived from looking at the hardest sciences possible and from the least myopic viewpoint. And so I see it a lot now. People are talking about it a lot. I can't remember that Gandhi quote, but it's like first they laugh at you, and then they fight you, and then they ignore you, and then you win, or something like that. Or
Yeah.
I think it's ignore you, and then they fight you, and then you win. And I think you're already seeing that play out with it. But yes, to go back to that question, yeah, it's dismal, it's grim to think about what may be on the rise, and we're already seeing some of that with the population declining, or at least and also along with the predictions of you know population declines. But we don't really know how accurate those are. You can't really predict something that extreme. But there are it's not looking very good. I'll just put it that way. Yes, I've
Right.
thought about that a lot.
Yeah, you were saying earlier with the hospital food being a big tragedy. The other thing too that's really weighing on me is just children, like this next generation, getting them
Mhm.
hooked on sugar, addicted, getting type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety, all these issues at younger and younger ages. I think it's all going to culminate together. But on the flip side, I totally agree with you. It seems like the adoption of keto carnivore is definitely spreading like crazy. Like
Mhm.
it makes sense too because you do it, Eddie, I do it, and people see us thriving, and then what are they doing? And unlike other things out there like Weight Watchers or these other diet programs that don't
Mhm.
necessarily work, this is actually working for so many people. So
Mhm.
I guess it's grim but potentially hopeful. There is a silver lining.
Yeah.
Man, I wish we had more time. This has been fascinating. I just want to say one more time, I absolutely love the book. I'm going to have a link in the description to the book. And Eddie, you got a great YouTube channel too. I'll link that. Is there anything else you'd like to shout out or mention, or that I could link to in the description?
If you want, you can put because I post 2 videos a week on YouTube, but I post 3 videos a week in total, and so there are exclusive ones. If you want to put my Patreon in there, if anyone is curious about learning more information, because many people, they don't want to watch just 2; they want to have that extra one. So at least you know allowing them to have that opportunity. Other than that, I'm not really active on social media quite yet. I'm focusing on other things, but yeah, I'm primarily on YouTube. That is my biggest thing is YouTube. So that is sufficient, honestly. So
Great. I'll have links to Eddie's Patreon, YouTube, and the book in the description. And I wouldn't just be mentioning it for the heck of it. I really did like it. I like, I'm gonna read this over. I couldn't stop reading it. It's really, really good. Congratulations too, by the way. That's a big accomplishment getting all that done.
thanks.
Um,
Yeah,
Good stuff. So thank you so much, Eddie. Really appreciate it.
yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks.
Have a good day.
You too.